gold is an aspect of the human attitude. If we feel good as gold and act good as gold, then everything comes into place, including gold.
Howdy folks, welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Thursday, October the 5th, 2017. And I have the very distinct honor and great pleasure of welcoming to the show a new guest. And this gentleman, he was born in Minnesota, he grew up in Texas, and he earned a degree in politics from Princeton University. He did graduate study in comparative economics at Stockholm University. He worked as an economist and investigative freelance journalist in New York and Europe. He's currently living in Germany. He has written a ton of books, like 7 or 8 books. His last book that's been in publication is The Lost Hegemon. And you can find out all about his whole biography, which is there on the screen. And you can read more about Mr. F. William Engdahl at williamengdahl.com. William, welcome to the Daily Coin.
Thank you, Roy, for having me.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're here, and I understand that you have a new project that you're working on, it's a new book that you're going to publish, and why don't you introduce that real quick?
I'd be glad to. It's called NGO Tyranny.
NGO Tyranny, that sounds interesting in itself.
Well, it's pretty interesting because it's defined about the last 35 years of world history, and very few people understand how this really works. What it describes is the project initiated by the Reagan administration CIA director Bill Casey back in 1982-83. He said, we have so many scandals where the CIA gets caught with its hand in the cookie jar, making a coup d'etat against Mossadegh in Iran or against Beniz in Guatemala, or it doesn't matter who. And this is really damaging us. Let's create a new model. Let's create private, quote unquote, private NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and have them do what the CIA does, regime change, dirty tricks, and so forth. But then when they're caught in the act, people say, oh, well, this is the National Endowment for Democracy. Oh, they're just a private NGO. Oh, okay. Well, they just got a little carried away, maybe, or whatever. And that's financed by the U.S. government. U.S. Agency for International Development, which is nothing but a pass-through for the CIA, finances the National Endowment for Democracy. The George Soros foundations worldwide act in lockstep with the NED and their daughter institutions. John McCain is, the chairman of the National Republican Institute, which is a daughter of the NED. So this whole operation is active in more than 50 countries around the world right now, where the U.S. wants to force regime change to get people to bow down to some nonsense orders out of Washington. And, I grew up in Texas, and I grew up in the 1950s and the 1960s, Rory. And, okay, we did some nasty things. We got involved in some very ugly messes like the Vietnam War, which we had no business being involved in, except that the banks of Wall Street and the military-industrial complex wanted us in there.
Exactly.
And big human tragedy ensued as a result of that. But the idea that we have to control every government in the world, this wasn't there. This came after the creation in the 80s of these NGOs. And they talk about democracy. They're human rights NGOs, Human Rights Watch, democracy, blah, 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 and so forth. And every time you hear that word, this is a democracy or human rights NGO in Syria or human rights NGO in Ukraine, or a human rights NGO in Russia, or a human rights NGO in China or Tibet or Malaysia or whatever, that should ring off the alarm bells that this is maybe a CIA covert operation.
Well,
And
it's gotten to the point, and I apologize for interrupting, William,
sure,
but it's gotten to the point to where personally, everything that I look at, as soon as it begins to unfold, just like what happened in Las Vegas, the Sunday night. As soon
yeah,
as that happened, it was my very first thought was, here's another false flag, and until I'm proven wrong, that is the point of view that's my stance. That is my
I,
stance that what
yeah,
happened in Las Vegas is just the latest in a long string of false flag operations perpetuated by the CIA or one of their NGO or one of their uh, drug money
cut out. Yeah,
fueled operations, and that's all that it is.
but
Or am I just whistling Dixie over here?
no, no, you're not. I know the tune Dixie, but the facts that have been released in the public about this 64-year-old shooter who had an arsenal equal to the Camp Lejeune or something like that in this hotel room, and the fact that he could fire off so many umpteen hundred rounds in a matter of 5 minutes and kill all these people. That's just physically, according to arms experts that I've seen, not possible.
Not
So
possible.
there are reports of shots being fired from 4 different locations in that hotel. So this was somebody did this.
Right.
Somebody did this for some reason. And what's the reason? To create terror. What
Right.
does terror create in the American population? Insecurity, fear, 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 fear. What does Donald Trump create? I hope you can bear with me on this, but I have opposed the nomination of Donald Trump from May of 2016. He's a gangster, he's a thug, but his job for the deep state, he is the deep state, by the way, his job for the deep state is to simply create fear, to create anger, to create aggression. Look at what he did in the Charlottesville incident there.
Yes.
He created aggression, and that feeds. It's a British intelligence model developed by General Kitson back around World War One and the Mau uprisings in Kenya, and it's called gang counter gang. Black versus white versus black. One hits the other hits the other, and then you get the thing started. Sooner or later, people don't have any clue what's going on, and they lose the big picture. They cannot think. They're filled with hate, rage, anger, frustration, and so forth. And that, I think, is the aim of this, so that America as a nation is being led down roads that in the 50s or the 60s we never would have tolerated.
Right. But I think that with the situation, this is just my perspective, that what happened in Las Vegas, I think it is that it was so sloppy, the work that whoever did this, the images, if you've seen any of the photographs, the still photos, because we still don't have any video evidence from
Yeah.
Mandalay Bay, from one of the most heavily surveilled locations on planet Earth. There's still no
Okay.
video evidence, and
Interesting.
which is Las Vegas. I mean, they have cameras everywhere. It's as bad as England. But
Yeah.
anyway, the still photographs from inside the room, you can't see any discarded bullets.
Really?
There's no
Okay.
cartridges. Have you seen
Okay.
any? I mean, if you
No, I
we
haven't
know
had
that
to
he
be
fired
honest.
at least 600 shots because there were close to 600 people either injured or killed. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you've got, we'll just round it up to 600. If he fired 600 shells, that means that there's going to be
One or two shells in
discarded
the gun.
that are going to be in some of these photographs. There's not
Yeah.
a single one. Not a single one. There's nothing.
Rory, yeah, I have to say that's not something I've researched, so I don't feel strong to comment on that, other than the general impression that what we're being told is not the truth.
It's nonsense.
Yeah,
But that's not why I wanted to. That's not where I wanted to go with this. And I'm glad that we're commenting on it, because this is the first time that I've been able to comment on it as
yeah,
far as what's happened. But you were talking about the NGO tyranny and the history of what's going on with that, and you brought in a very important character that most of my audience is going to be able to relate to, and that's George Soros, and the
yeah.
criminal that he is, and the war criminal that John McCain is. My audience is well aware of these people and what they've done, and the
Mhm.
fact that Russia recently outlawed George Soros and any NGO that he has operating in Russia.
Right.
Why are we not seeing more of that, in places like Ukraine or Syria or Libya or the United States or Canada or wherever this criminal happens to set up shop? What's it going to take to see more of that happen?
It's the government of Hungary, Viktor Orban, who I guess probably the average American, if they read anything at all about Hungary, they have the impression from the mainstream media that Viktor Orban is some kind of a jackboot Nazi running around Hungary, spilling blood everywhere and so forth. He's an Oxford educated, very sophisticated, and very clear, I would call him an honest Democrat. And he said many, 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 many times this policy of unlimited refugees into the European Union is destroying our culture, our history, our tradition, our people, and we have no control over it. We have the sovereign right to decide who we admit as a citizen or a prospective citizen in our nation. That I believe every nation has the sovereign right to. It's not at all to do about racism or not racism. This is a false flag. It has to
Right.
do about what you want to build up in your society,
Right.
and so Orban and his parliament earlier this year, I think April or May, passed a law against not against undesirable NGOs like Russia calls them. I like that. They passed a law saying that NGOs who get foreign money over a certain amount must report all the details of the sources of that money and be open to examination by the government. Now that's the European Commission in Brussels and the Western media, CNN, all these do-gooders are screaming bloody murder. This is dictatorial, blah blah blah. The United States has a law called the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which I believe goes back to the 1980s, and it's exactly the same thing. You know, who's messing around with this? Let's know who the funding comes from and so forth. You file your filings, and we decide if that's something we want to look into, and maybe we want to restrict. That's our right as a government. And nothing more is being done by Russia or by China or by Hungary or by Israel, by the way. I have
Yeah.
to I have to mention a very amusing sidelight on this. I'm no friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. Anybody who knows my writings can attest to that. Recently, Viktor Orban in Hungary was attacked by the Israeli ambassador in Budapest as being anti-Semitic. A series of ads that his Fidesz party was billboards that he was running around the country that attacked George Soros. And Orban knows Soros. Soros is Hungarian. His Central European University is right there in Budapest and creating trouble without end. But suddenly, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, jumped to the defense of Viktor Orban and said, this is not at all anti-Semitic. George Soros is no friend of Israel. In fact, his NGOs are trying to destabilize the Israeli government.
Wow.
So Israel has also passed a law against these NGOs.
Wow. I would have, man, I'm shocked at hearing that, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it's out there. You can find it.
Wow. I believe you. I mean,
As
I
I
would
say,
have never thought
I'm
that.
no friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, but
Yeah, me neither.
realpolitik is realpolitik.
Yeah, I'm no friend of Netanyahu either. I mean, that man has some serious issues, but don't want to get into that. I wanted to kind of change gears a little bit, William. The Belt and Road Initiative, some people probably remember it as the One Belt, One Road, or the New Silk Road that's being headed by
Yeah,
China.
yeah.
We have, there's a lot going on with this global project. And we now have Venezuela that just recently said, we're not taking dollars for our oil anymore, period. It's causing too many problems, and our country is in ruin. We're going to take a basket of currencies. And now it seems that the door is probably open for Venezuela to join the Belt Road Initiative, maybe even become a member or an observer member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization
No,
or the
that can't
BRICS.
happen because of the geographical, but maybe BRICS or something
Yeah,
like that.
The BRICS nation, the BRICS alliance has been courting Mexico for a number of years,
Mm-hmm.
and now if they start courting Venezuela as well, I mean, now all of a sudden we have two major countries at our doorstep, at the United States doorstep, that are now 100% aligned with the East and no longer aligned with Western anything, finance or banking or any of the nonsense and
Yeah.
murderous debt and death that we uh, tend to rely upon as a business model. They're actually, whereas in the East, they actually rely upon business models as business models. And how do you see this unfolding, and what your research is showing?
The Belt Road Initiative that was proposed by Xi Jinping, the president of China, in Kazakhstan back in 2013 was, in fact, a reaction to the absolutely stupid Obama administration. Hillary Clinton played a role in this as Secretary of State back then. Decision in 2010 to create a so-called Asia pivot to bring U.S. military presence out of the Middle East, to a large degree. It didn't happen because of the developments in Syria, but out of the Middle East into the East China Sea, into Asia, into Australia, and so forth, as a so-called Asia pivot, which was nothing more or less than a China pivot to focus on China as what Brzezinski called a threat against the sole superpower hegemony of the United States. China has an internal economic problem that they've built pretty much unbelievable things in the last 38 or 36 years. I've been to China 16 times in the last, since 2008 April. And I've been all over China. I've been invited to Chengdu in Sichuan province. I've been invited to Kunming near the border of Laos. I've been invited to Xi'an, where the biggest rail terminal in all of Asia was built a couple of years ago for the Silk Road, the Belt Road Initiative, with high-speed trains leaving in every direction, every minute and a half. And of course, to Beijing and all the coastal states, Shanghai, and so forth. So I have a pretty good sense of China, and I don't know how many of your readers ever have heard of a city called Kunming. I had not heard of it before 3 years ago when I was invited to give a talk there by a university. A friend of mine was a professor at that time. and it's a city of 10 million people, modern skyscrapers. What do you call them? These belt roads. And this is one of the crossroads of the Belt Road Initiative. And what the genius of the Chinese, Xi Jinping, among others, who decided to make this the focal point of his tenure as president, he said, China has built internally the last 34, 36 years. Now, to continue the stability of the Chinese growth, we have to develop external growth areas and building infrastructure throughout Central Asia, throughout Eurasia, connecting with Russia and the Russian Eurasian Economic Union, connecting with the European Union, except the European Union at the top is a rotten skunk. Just write it off the map and the world would be better off for it.
Couldn't agree more.
But it's a fascist construct that was put in there by European aristocracy who, like fascism, like to have top-down control.
Yes.
And it has nothing to do with national sovereignty, as Hungary has demonstrated again and again. So, but what the Chinese are doing is going to individual countries. They're going to Greece. They've bought controlling interest in the deepwater port of Piraeus. The Greeks have no money, as everybody knows.
Right.
But the Chinese are coming in, building high-tech, modern deepwater ports for Chinese trade. And that's all to the good for the Greek economy. Greek tourist companies, or Chinese tourist companies, about 6 months ago, signed an agreement with the Greek government that they will guarantee 1.5 million Chinese tourists a year will come to Greece. Well, it's a great place. The Chinese have a huge middle class. They have money. They want to see the world. I don't blame them. It's a wonderful thing. And they want to come to Greece. All this history and nice climate and good food.
The birthplace of democracy.
Well, maybe. But I call it tourism geopolitics. So the Chinese are, they're building up, and the Russians are building up. If people look at it with the clear-eyed view, they are building up everywhere there's a possibility. And what we in the West are doing, what Washington is doing, the corrupt cesspool called Washington, which is probably more corrupt than the Roman Empire 400 after Christ when they collapsed out of internal rot, not out of invasion. All that Washington can come up with is how to destroy, how to make wars, how to ruin this country, ruin that country, blow up this, blow up that. This is stupid. I don't know what other name to give it. It's not even done from a standpoint of power.
But that's one of the signs of a dying empire. It's like a wounded animal. I mean, it's just lashing out at anything.
Yeah. Well, look at John McCain with his brain tumor or whatever. His actions bespeak someone who has, my sympathies for anyone with a brain tumor. I had a dear friend who died of a brain tumor. But John McCain and the people around him, the neocons, they're mediocre intellects. They're not even intellects. They're mediocrities. Let me give you a stark example. I have been writing about geopolitics since, I would say, the late 1970s or the mid 1970s. And oil politics, political, economic power in the world. And back then, you had a Secretary of State, an evil son of a bitch, excuse my French here, but Henry A. Kissinger. He brought Pinochet into power in Chile. He signed off on the assassination of Allende. He brought in the military junta in Argentina, one of the most brutal regimes. this is Henry Kissinger. But Henry Kissinger understood a little bit, at least, of history, of British geopolitics, of balance of power, and so forth. And as he put it, within 1 year, these idiotic neocons destroyed something I spent 30 years trying to build up in terms of seducing Russia into the West.
Wow.
And what they did with their Ukraine coup d'etat, and that was a coup d'etat by neocons, Victoria and so forth. Even George Friedman of Stratfor said this in an interview, the most blatant coup d'etat in U.S. history, that the idea of driving a wedge between Europe and Russia simply forced Russia to do something it was half-half, maybe yes, maybe no, maybe yes, maybe no. Do we go west or do we go east? Medvedev was the faction in Russian establishment that said we go west. That was a disaster.
Yep.
Okay, and Putin, excuse me, from the beginning, from his beginning of his tenure in 2000 as president, said no, we defend Russian national interests. And the coup d'etat in Ukraine tipped the balance, and Putin and Russia went east, and they forged agreements with China. They forged agreements with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is all of Central Asia, the former Soviet Central Asian economies that are now independent. And now the Chinese are building high-speed railways. By the way, consciously, the routes of those high-speed rail links will go toward mining deposits in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Central Asia, where large known gold reserves have been known since the Soviet era, but because the Soviet monetary system did not have any interest in gold, and the Soviet finances were taxed to the hilt on the military side for the Cold War that the U.S. was waging, those reserves are undeveloped, huge gold reserves. So the Chinese are going to build these railways to go and bring the gold to market. It's brilliant. And they said explicitly, they said, this will allow these very poor Central Asian economies to have gold-backed currencies so we can trade on a stable basis. This is going to create huge new markets. 42% of the world's population is encompassed by this Belt Road Initiative.
Yes. And north of 50%, once the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, once that is fully outlined or fully known, it will incorporate more than 50% of the global population and somewhere around 70 or more percent of the global natural resources as well, including gold, including diamonds, including oil. These are everything.
Russia, I don't know if most Americans are aware of this. If you take out an atlas and look at the map of Russia, it's the largest landmass on the face of the earth.
It is gargantuan.
Yeah, it goes from the borders of Finland on the west to the Pacific Ocean, Korea.
Or as that nut in Alaska said, her backyard.
Your backyard.
Sarah Palin.
Sarah Palin's backyard. Yeah, there it is.
Goes from Finland to Sarah Palin's backyard.
Yeah. But I forgot about her. Excuse me. But the point is, there's every raw material. And the Chinese, there's a synergy between China and Russia. The Russian military with a shoestring budget, you compare that with the lunacy and the corruption of the Pentagon budget, and this is not me, this is not something I dreamed up, this is the Auditor General of the United States Armed Forces Pentagon, made a report last year saying there is $6.5 trillion in the Department of the Army of the United States, where there is no audit trail. There is no possibility to check whether these dollars line the pockets of some corrupt general or paid for some sex binge in Thailand, or went to arm ISIS or whatever. There's no audit trail for $6.5 trillion of the United States Army budget in the last several years. Is there something wrong in Washington? Is there something really out of control?
I'd say about 6.5 trillion things are wrong.
No, really, this is serious. But we are so, as long as we get stirred up by, psychopathic killers shooting five and wounding 500 people in a country festival in Las Vegas, or something in Charlottesville, or Black Lives Matter in Dallas, Texas, where I grew up, and all the Soros money behind that, and so forth. It keeps us distracted, and we don't think clearly about what's happening to us as a nation, as a country.
Exactly. I want to stay with gold for a minute. You brought that up as far as these members of the McKenna's heartland, the Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan in particular, which is where Xi Jinping announced the original new Silk Road,
right?
And it's in Kazakhstan. They also announced, or they didn't announce, but the director of finance for Kazakhstan met with the president of the Shanghai Gold Exchange, I believe in 2012 or 2013, somewhere around there, for the specific purpose of discussing gold as trade settlement along the Belt Road Initiative. At that time, they were calling it the New Silk Road, but gold as trade settlement along the New Silk Road. How is that going to happen or what does your research show, William, as far as gold being used as trade settlement, either along the Belt Road Initiative or in the larger global monetary system? What are you seeing within all of your research?
As settlement, I would say that's not the primary point if you want to understand what's being built up by China and by Russia right now.
Okay.
What is being built up, in my view, is a new gold standard independent of the US dollar. Nobody knows how many tons of gold are in Fort Knox. Who was it? Mnuchin claimed he made a visit and everything is cool and blah, blah, blah.
Gold is safe.
Gold is safe. I trust him as far as I can throw my late unlamented grandmother. But the point is that the Chinese and the Russian central banks in the past, I would say 8 or 9 or 10 years, have been the major buyers of bullion gold on the world market. No one comes close. And even right up until last month, Russia outclasses every other buyer.
Everybody. They're way out in front.
Yeah. Now, if you contrast that to the 1990-91 period, when the CIA made a coup d'etat called Boris Yeltsin, this I document in my new book, The NGO Tyranny, how they did it, the names of the KGB officers they corrupted with gold, among other things. Barrick Gold was involved in that, up to their eyeballs. And George Bush Sr., the whole shebang. What they did, among other things, consciously, was to steal the gold reserves of the Soviet Union. In the first 2 years, in the early 90s, And the head of the central bank, who was in on the steal, announced to the Russian Duma in this period of chaos in Russia, uh, the gold reserves are gone. We don't know where they went. Oh.
Wow.
And he had an offshore company that was facilitating the theft. So since that time, Russia has been quietly and steadily building up its gold reserves. And what it's doing is creating credibility for the Russian ruble in markets that are not dominated by the dollar. And the Chinese are doing the same. By the way, South Africa is no longer the world's leading gold producer. They're number 7. They're a disaster in terms of infrastructure and efficiency in mining.
Yeah, they can't quit striking down there. I mean,
Well,
they're constantly on strike.
investment and everything. It's just,
Everything.
yeah. But who is number 1 gold producer in the world today? The People's Republic of China. And number 2, by some accounts, is the Russian Federation. Isn't that interesting? And there's more gold out there. There's gold in them our hills.
Yes, there
So
is.
yeah, so this is, and as we mentioned in our pre-talk, I'm of the view that gold is more than just a metal that's in limited supply. It's something special. It has a unique value in human history. It's the metal of the sun. It has the energy of the sun, and that for humankind is a very special energy.
Yes, I've
And,
heard it referred to as tears of the sun.
okay, beautiful analogy.
Yes.
So the Chinese and the Russians are very conscious of this role of gold, and they are building that quietly so that there is an alternative to a single currency dictatorship called the dollar system. This is not about the people of the United States of America. We are being played for the suckers. We are being played for the fools, for the cannon fodder, and so forth, for these Wall Street oligarchs, the George Soroses, the David Rockefellers, who is deceased but unlamented, the Brzezinskis, and who's deceased but unlimited, and the Kissingers, who are soon to be deceased and unlimited, in my view.
They can't pass quick enough for me.
Well, but the point is not individuals. The point is a certain energy, and that energy is dying.
Thank goodness.
This is the good news. The people are fed up to the gills with wars.
Yes.
Do American people really want wars everywhere, where we give our lives, our sons and daughters, and so, like in Iraq, this catastrophic debacle, or in Afghanistan, this catastrophic debacle, where Trump is now going to send 10,000 more? Doesn't matter. It's stupid. Get out. Stop sticking your nose in everybody's business.
Afghanistan is about the heroin. That's the bottom line. We have no reason to be in Afghanistan except for the poppy fields that feed the heroin, and you can go back and look at the production when the Taliban, which I'm not saying that the Taliban is some humanitarian, some great organization or government, but under the Taliban, in Afghanistan, the poppy production was on the decline and was at the lowest point in a number of years, if not decades. And when the when the U.S. military went back in and overthrew the Taliban, poppy production exploded. And now they have been running at the highest levels in the history of Afghanistan. And it just so happens that we happen to have a global opioid epidemic. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder where that came from. But anyway, I'm sorry. I had to throw that in there because it burns
quite
me
accurate.
up.
It's quite accurate. And the CIA likes to finance their black operation with drugs. They did that in Laos and Vietnam and so forth.
Yes, and they're still doing it.
The Colombian cartels. Who's really running the Colombian cartels? Is it the Colombians or is it the CIA? Or the Mexican cartels.
Oh my goodness. It's not the Mexicans and it's not the Colombians. That would be my guess
Who are
anyway.
the banks that the Mexicans and the Colombians have to use to launder billions and billions of dollars? It's not
Exactly.
the neighborhood Jalisco Savings and Loan. I can tell you that. It's Citigroup, it's Hong Kong Shanghai Bank,
Yep.
HSBC, it's UBS Bank,
Yep.
it's you know
JP
JP
Morgan,
yeah.
all the other
Yeah, the
scumbags.
bankers control the drug trade, not the mules or the guys on the ground who shoot everybody up.
Exactly. They're like you said a minute ago, just cannon fodder, and that's it. I mean, they're just
Yeah.
collateral damage. We've gotten kind of gone astray here for just a minute, William, and just to wrap things up,
Hmm.
what would you say is going to happen over the course of the next decade or less with gold and the global monetary system? How do you see that in elevator speech? How do you see that playing out?
In the next, I would say even less than 10 years, in the next 5 years, I have a very strong feeling nobody can predict something so complex with accuracy, but I have the feeling that the world is going to walk away in a major tempo from the dollar system. It's a bankrupt system. The Bretton Woods system is bankrupt. It was designed to feed one economy, and that's a hubris that is the gods punish you in the time of the Greeks or the Romans for hubris, and that's what the American century of Robert Henry Luce and the people who built that up in 1945, 48 were all about. They thought they were the gods of money, the gods of the world, and that's an arrogance that we don't need anymore. We don't need. We need to respect human life, human dignity, and in terms of gold, we are seeing it already. The seed crystal of alternative monetary systems, the Chinese yuan, the Russian ruble. India, unfortunately, at the moment seems to be in the pocket of Washington.
Yes.
Narendra Modi is insane, I would say, to put
Corrupt to
it
the core.
corrupt to the core. But leaving India out of the picture right now, the rest of the world, the sane world, is really building intelligent alternatives, and that in every case has gold in the center. So I think the prospects for gold are wonderful. I follow that with my personal and convictions and my personal interest. Gold is what I'm invested in.
Gold is what I'm invested in as well, and I think that, and a large part of my audience is as well. We're all big fans of gold. We're big fans of silver. We honest money, and it's one of the things from my perspective and from what I can tell from the research that I've done, it's one of the few items that can actually rein these corrupt, criminal dirt bags that it can get them under control. It can tie their purse strings. I mean, can gold be corrupted? Anything can be corrupted, but it has throughout history, it has shown the fortitude to be able to stand up to the attacks from a criminally corrupt government or a criminally corrupt banking system. Gold has shown the fortitude to be able to stand up and say, well, that's a lie you're telling right there. And that's a big part of gold's job, is to do that, is to say that currency is lying and
You're
you're
cheating.
lying.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I hope, I really I see gold coming back to the table. I think that it's already
back. It's just
back. Exactly.
the reason the Chinese have created the Shanghai Gold Exchange is because the price fixing of gold is corrupt in the West, in London and in New York. And the Chinese said, no, we're not going to play these games. We're going to create our own gold settlement for Asia, and that's going to define the dominant price of gold. So that's already underway.
It's already happening. I love it. Absolutely love it. Well, William, I'm going to let you get back to your afternoon or your evening because you're in Germany and it's rather late over there.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and I hope that we can do this again in the not too distant future because you have a great handle on what's going on and one that we need. We need your voice out there a lot
Well,
more.
I'd be more than happy to come back on, Roy.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. And we've been speaking with F. William Engdahl, and you can find all of his great work, including a link to his free newsletter, all of the books that he's written, which are, like I said, there's about 7 of them. There'll be a link to his website, which is williamengdahl.com, in the description below the video. And William, thank you once again for all your time this evening.
Thank you, Roy. I enjoyed it.